Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you tonight here with us. My name is Evan. I'm here with my colleague Romkje. Recently, I was able to sit down and interview Romkje about her time working for Ms. Corrie ten Boom and ask her some questions about her time working for Corrie and the life lessons she learned from it. We're going to shortly play the interview for you. And while we are doing that, we invite you to write any questions you may have in the comment sections. And while you're there, we also invite you to subscribe and like our videos and hit the notification bell so that you can hear our upcoming short video shorts. And so we will play the video for you guys now. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm here with Romkje Fountain, who is founder of YWAM the Netherlands, which is the organization that helps run our Look Up events. She is married to Jeff and the mother of 3 and is from a very small village in the Netherlands, as I've been told.
Yes.
And tonight I will be interviewing her about her time working for Corrie ten Boom and let her share a little bit about Corrie's life as well. And I thought we could start more at the beginning because we're sitting here in Amsterdam, and we thought Corrie was born in Amsterdam, right?
Yes, Corrie was born in a little shop in Amsterdam, not too far away from here. And I haven't lived too long in Amsterdam myself, although when we started Youth with a Mission, in 1973, I lived in Amsterdam for a little bit, but when we moved to Amsterdam and I had to tidy up lots of things, to my great surprise, I came across a letter that actually was addressed to me, and it was registered and express, which was, you know, the kind of letter you hardly ever got, and it was written by Corrie's assistant, Ellen. And Ellen was a very good friend of mine, and they invited me to become Corrie's secretary. And so that's how my relationship with Corrie started. Although as a young person I had heard about her when I was 17 and she was 71, which at the time I thought was extremely old, but now I'm old myself even in 71. And I had read that she was traveling the world sharing with people about the experiences she had had in the concentration camp and about her life, and that she never slept in the same bed. And I felt as a girl of 17 so so ashamed almost that I was sleeping in my own bed every night, and here she was, an elderly lady traveling the world. And so it was a great honor for me to then become her secretary in 1972.
1972?
1972.
Yes.
Which was 1 year before Youth with a Mission was started.
Okay. So you worked for her for a whole year?
I worked for her 2.5 years full time.
Okay.
And then after that, whenever she needed somebody to type some letters for her, I would go over and work for her. Okay. So she was quite a part of my life for some years.
I can imagine.
Yes.
I can imagine you guys were very close, working for her every day.
Yes, but she traveled, of course, very much. And then I would be all by myself working in her office while she traveled the world with her traveling companion, Ellen.
I see.
Yes.
Excellent.
And so Corrie was one of the very few people in the Netherlands who knew about Youth with a Mission, because she had met Lauren Cunningham and had heard about Youth with a Mission. And I've heard Corrie say many times, I wish I were still a youth with a mission, because I would love to join Youth with a Mission. And so that's why we like to call her the mother of YWAM, because she very much encouraged us, I and a few other people, to start Youth with a Mission in 1973.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes,
that's wonderful. And Do you think you could tell us some about Corrie's life, like how her childhood was?
Yes, yes. She, as I said, she was born in Amsterdam, but when she was young, they moved to Haarlem, where her grandfather had a watch shop, and her father took over that shop, and that's where the family lived. Corrie and her mother and her two sisters and one brother, plus 3 elderly aunts. It was a very small house, and her father then bought the house behind the shop as well, and they made it into one house. And it was an amazing house because all the floors were different, because there were 2 houses kind of put together, and in the little alley between the 2 houses, that became the winding stairs upstairs. Yes. And actually it was a very good house for building a hiding place later on. Mm-hmm. I'll say some more about that later. But Corrie had a very happy childhood. I was just reading again in one of her books how the family never had a lot of money, but they were a happy family. Guests were always welcome, and the aunts were very much part of the family. Okay. And Corrie and her older sister Betsy, they never were married, although Corrie would have liked to have been married, but it didn't happen. But I've often heard her say as well that she raised 14 children. They were either orphans or the children of missionaries, and so she was very much involved with young people. She loved young people, even when I knew her. And she started clubs for girls in Haarlem, and so she had a very active life before the war started. And she was born prematurely, 3 weeks prematurely, and they didn't think she would live. But she died on her 91st birthday. Amazing. Which is really amazing, I think. Yes.
Super miraculous.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the war.
Yes. Corrie and Betsy and her father, their father, they lived then in the house in Haarlem when the war started. Yes. The family had always had a love for the Jews, and so when the war started, very quickly Corrie got involved in the resistance movement, and they also were taking in Jews and other people that had problems with the Germans.
I see.
And in their house then was built a hiding place if ever the Germans would come to the house, that the Jews could hide in this hiding place. Actually, it was built just for a few hours for 4 people. But when it happened, 6 people were in that hiding place for 2 days.
2 full days.
2 full days in a very, very tiny room.
I have been to Corrie ten Boom's house, as it is now a museum. If you guys are ever in the Netherlands, I would highly recommend it. But it is a very small space. I remember standing in there, and it's not much wider than I am.
No, it's a very small place. And Corrie then started to also have exercises with these people that were illegally in the house, and so she trained them to get into the room within a minute, but they never managed that. I think the shortest time was 91 seconds. And that's why it's interesting, this house, because they have this winding staircase, and one of the Jews, and I think maybe even 2, were elderly, so it was not easy for them to get into that hiding place. And the miracle was when on the 28th of February 1944, when a man came to the door of the shop downstairs in the house and asked for money so his wife could be bought out of her out of the prison. He betrayed the family. And Corrie was sick. She was upstairs in her room after she had left the money downstairs for this man. And when the man came, Betsy saw that the street was full of vehicles, which was unusual. You know, there weren't many vehicles. And so she rang this alarm bell, and the people that were in the house, 4 Jews and 2 workers of the resistance movement, they could go into the hiding place. And the Germans never found them, which was another miracle.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Most certainly.
Yes. But Corrie and her sister and her father and her brother, they were all taken to prison in Scheveningen. And Corrie actually was in a solitary confinement there for many weeks, which she found really difficult because there were always people around her. That house was so small and they were so hospitable, there were always people. I've often heard her say that was one of the hardest things that she had to go through. And then when the invasion came in the spring of 1944, the prison in Scheveningen was emptied, and she and Betsy, whom she hadn't seen all these months when she was in the prison in Scheveningen, they were then taken to Vught together, where they were for some months, and then later they were transported in cattle trains to Ravensbrück, where she and Betsy were in the concentration camp.
Yes.
And let me see, one of the books that I have some books here.
Yes.
This
quite a collection.
Yes. Well, actually, this book, The Hiding Place, talks a lot about the time before in the hiding place, but also in the concentration camp where Betsy died.
I see.
And then after a week after Betsy died, Corrie was released from the concentration camp.
And can you tell us, I hear that's an interesting story, can you tell us more about how she got released?
Yes, she says it was a miracle of God and a blunder of people. And so when her number was called in that morning when she was released, she thought she would go to be killed, but no, she was released. And so that was around Christmas time, 1944, 10 months after she was taken.
10 months?
10 months. They were in the prison and in 2 different camps.
Concentration camps.
Yes.
And can I ask, go back slightly chronologically to ask what she did in the camps, slightly before she was released?
Well, they when they came into the camp, they were put in barracks where there were lice. And Betsy said to Corrie, we must be grateful. And Corrie thought, well, how can Betsy say such a thing? But in the end, Corrie saw that it was true. Because of the lice, the Germans were so afraid that they hardly ever came to that barrack. And so Corrie and Betsy shared a lot from the little Bible that they had, and that was also illegal, of course, to have a Bible in the concentration camp. But they shared with these women, and of course so many of them knew that after a few days they might have to go to the crematorium.
I see.
So they had quite an amazing ministry. And one of the really, I think, the stories that I've heard Corrie say many times is when she had a little bottle with vitamin drops, and how that bottle never got empty.
Oh my goodness.
Till she got some other vitamin pills, and then she discovered the little bottle was empty.
As the widow from the story in Samuel.
Something like that, yes.
That is amazing.
Yes.
That is amazing.
But already in the concentration camp, Betsy had told Corrie, after we are released, we must tell people in the world, we must travel the world and tell people that even if the worst happens, the everlasting arms of God are still underneath us. And
Amazing.
So that's exactly what Corrie did after she was released and after the war was over. And the other thing that Betsy had told Corrie is we must open a home for people who've suffered and we must have a lot of color. Because in the concentration camp, everything was grey. Corrie didn't like grey. She loved colors. And so they then, after the war, she was able to get a house in Holland for people who had suffered in the concentration camp, and also a former concentration camp in Germany. And she planted all beautiful flowers there. So she said the color will be so healing for people. There's some amazing stories, you know. I can tell the whole evening, which I won't do. But Corrie, I think it was already in 1946 that she went for the first time to America. And while she was there, she had some help from people who introduced her to speak in churches about what she did in the war.
That's awesome.
Yes.
It's very good to hear, and cool to hear these stories. I definitely want to hear more. You had mentioned that Corrie had been doing these travels, and can you tell us a bit more about the time after the war?
Yes. She, as I said, I think that was the first country she went to, America, and then she went to Germany. Already in 1947, she went to Germany. And one of the stories that I've heard her say many times is that she was in a church in Munich and she talked about forgiveness. And while the people all left the church, one man came forward and she recognized him as one of the guards from the camp. And he said to her, Fräulein ten Boom, Miss ten Boom, I was one of your guards. And she said, no, he didn't recognize me, but I recognized him because he had been so cruel. And he said, after the war, I've become a believer and I know that my sins are forgiven, but I would so love to hear from you that you could forgive me. And Corrie told people it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, to actually forgive this man. And she prayed and she said, oh, help, Lord, help me. And she realized that she would have to do it because she felt that if you can't forgive others, our sins cannot be forgiven either. And so after a long time, probably wasn't so long, but in her feeling it was a long time, she lifted up her hand and she shook the hand of this guard. And she said, the most amazing thing happened. It was like a current went through my arm, from my shoulder, and it kind of went from my hand into his hand. And my heart had been so cold. And I realized that forgiveness is not a feeling, but it's an act of the will. And she said, all of a sudden, this forgiveness, this sense of forgiveness just filled my being. And she could say to this man, I forgive you, brother, with all my heart. Amazing. And so that was, I think, why her ministry after the war was so important, because she had experienced things that most people will never experience.
Yeah.
And so she went to Africa, and to Japan, and to New Zealand, and to South America, and with amazing stories how God led her, because she always felt she had to ask God where to go.
Yes.
And sometimes it was a big surprise to her that she had, for example, to go to Argentina or to Cuba, or even to New Zealand.
Exactly. I've heard some stories and read a bit of her work, and it seems like she went all to...
I think it was 60 countries that she went to.
Incredible.
Yes.
Incredible. Living out of a suitcase the whole time.
Yes, and being in a different bed every night. Sometimes they were wonderful feather beds, she said, in America, and sometimes they were just mud floors with a very thin little mattress.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And do you have any specific stories that she told you about any of her journeys that you would
Yes,
highlight?
yes. I remember that when I worked for her, she got an invitation from Billy Graham to go to Lausanne.
Wow.
To be one of the very few women speakers at the first Lausanne Congress on World Evangelization.
Amazing.
And I was there too in Lausanne, and it was, it was an amazing that she could actually share her testimony there. So those are one of my very fond memories of Corrie. But she also told us other stories about going to America or going to Russia, and going to, was it Latvia or Estonia, where she visited a woman who had multiple sclerosis. And she would translate Corrie's books and Billy Graham's books, and she could only use one finger. And she typed the translation of these books on a very old typewriter.
With one finger.
With one finger, yes.
Do you happen to know how long that lady did it for? Many
Well,
years?
for many years, I think.
Many years.
Yes.
That sounds like an incredible testament.
Yes,
to
yes, yes, yes.
Consistency with God.
Yes.
Every day.
And I also remember that she was, I think it must have been Russia, at a time when you really couldn't go to Russia.
Yeah, the Soviet Union.
Yeah, that they were in a hotel room, and they knew that there would be microphones everywhere to pick up, the discussion. And then Ellen, who traveled with Corrie, she would say, Tante Corrie, Tante Corrie would say to Ellen, Ellen, I'm becoming such an old lady, and I don't really know what it is to follow Jesus. Could you explain it to me? And so then Ellen would explain it to Corrie. Corrie, of course, knew it very well.
Yes.
And so she was also very cunning, really, in many ways.
That's very
Yes, yes,
so
yes.
Around the,
Yes. She was. She had also such a sense of humor, and I learned a lot from her, because one of the things that always struck me, that she was transparent. There was no hypocrisy in her.
Oh.
She was
Very
straight. Yeah, and I've always wanted. That was one of the things that I thought, well, if I grow up, that's how I want to be. No, no funny little hypocrisy things. To be the same outside as inside. And that was very much what Corrie was like.
A very noble desire and a great example to follow.
Very much an example that I wanted to follow.
Of course. And do you have any stories from when you were with Corrie, particularly like about working for her or with your life?
Yes, when I first came to work for her, she wasn't there actually. She was in America, and she would get many letters from all over the world. But some of the letters that were the most difficult were the letters that came from Germany, because this is 1972, 73 that I worked for her. It was only a short time after the war, and people had such complicated questions. And then I would think to myself, you know what, I leave that letter for Corrie to answer, because I don't have the wisdom to answer. So I said, Tante Corrie, here are some letters from German ladies. Could you answer them? And she would say to me, child, who do you think I will ask for an answer on this letter? And I said, well, you would pray and ask God. And she said, yes, and don't we have the same Father? Couldn't he give you the answer as well? And it was such an incredible trust that she had in me as a young person, because I was just in my early 20s. And so I would just sit there and think and how to write it in German with all these German complicated words. And but wasn't that a wonderful thing that she really trusted me like that? Yes.
17, 18-year-old.
No, I was older then. I was in my early 20s
Early
at the
20s.
time. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
That is.
It was really amazing. Yeah. And one time I made a very bad mistake. And she was really not pleased with me.
Yeah.
And that was the other good thing about Corrie, that she would be honest with you, you know, that I'd done something wrong. And so I said to her, Tante Corrie, would you please forgive me? Of course, I didn't do it intentionally. And she said the same to me as she said to this German guard, of course, I forgive you with all my heart. And then months later, I reminded her of that occasion. Mm-hmm. And she couldn't remember it. And it was not because she was old, but really she practiced what she preached. Forgive and forget.
Forget.
Yeah.
That's a great example to follow.
Yes, wonderful. It really was. Yes.
And on a lighter note, I'm interested to hear if you have like a funny story or just a funny. I hear she had a funny sense of humor. Yeah,
she really had a very good sense of humor. Yes, when I first, the very first meal I had cooked for her, I hadn't really cooked enough. So we were eating soup with a very small spoon. And then she said, well, this is like eating soup with a small spoon. It's like eating soup with a fork. And eating soup with a fork is like kissing. You never get enough of it. And I didn't quite know what to do, but it was so funny that I laughed very loud. So I passed my test because she wanted, you know, me to not be, she wanted me to enjoy her humor. Of course. And of course she did. And of course when I got to know Jeff, my own parents had died by that time when Jeff and I became friends, and I wanted Corrie to approve of him, and that was really very good that she did.
She did?
She did.
How did that meeting go?
Well, it was amazing because Jeff, I think he also wanted to make a good impression, so he said to her, Tante Corrie, you must be so busy writing your new book. And she said to him, my new book? My 5 new books.
5?
So she really worked till she couldn't work anymore.
I see.
And it's amazing because her books are still being reprinted and also still being translated because her message is really timeless.
It sure is.
Trusting God, forgiveness, realizing that we need Him in our lives, and they're very practical books.
Yes. That's a very, very good. It looks like there's a lot of different ones you have here from her.
Yes, Jeff just put down a little stack of the books that we have and that we lend out to people because it's really worth it to still read her books.
Yes.
I do all the time, you know, because when I speak about Corrie, I want to know that what I'm saying is the truth.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
That's very good, and good for review, I guess, and to I'm glad her life has been well documented and that she has written her own autobiographies.
Yes.
Because there's people like me that who were not alive when Corrie was alive, and cannot simply walk into one of her lectures or anything.
No.
And so I was wondering if you had any stories about like lessons that you learned from her, or you've said a little already, but if in particular for particularly people like me who weren't able to meet her.
Yes, well, actually, a lot of her talks are on YouTube. So go to YouTube. YouTube, and you will hear some of her talks.
Okay.
And she had a beautiful, strong voice till she was really old.
Yeah.
And I think her message about forgiveness is very important still. We all need to forgive all the time. And one of the in one of her books, she writes when she's in her 80s, she did something happened, and she spoke very unkindly to some lady, and she knew that it was wrong, that she had done something wrong, so she had to go back, almost miss her plane, to ask for forgiveness. And so that is a very important lesson that Corrie, I think, still preaches today. And the other one is how important it is to always listen to God, not to go and follow your own insight, but to really trust God. And he sometimes told her amazing things to do. Like one time, she had to make a trip from, I think it was Taiwan or somewhere in the east, to South Africa. And the travel agent said, no, you can't travel directly to South Africa because there is no place to for the plane to refuel. And then Corrie said, well, we might have to pray for an island in the Indian Ocean. And I think it was the next day that the travel agent called up and said, well, this is really quite amazing. We've just heard from Qantas that they now have landing rights in an island in the Indian Ocean. So you can travel directly from, I think it was Taiwan or somewhere.
Somewhere in the east.
Or Auckland, and you can go directly. You don't have to first go to Tel Aviv.
All the way up in Tel Aviv.
Yeah. So there are some really amazing stories that that encouraged me as a young person, you know, to see that she had such a long life of following Jesus, and it wasn't always easy, of course, but that she had a transparent life, you know, not to have the reality of not life. To think, well, I'm better than the rest, but to know that we are all needing forgiveness all the time. I remember one time she had been preaching about the importance of doing what God tells you to do, and she got a little bit upset because she had to go up 10 steps of stairs. Yeah. And then the last sentence that she said, Corrie ten Boom should listen to her own sermons a little bit better. And I always like that, because I think I sometimes say that to Jeff, I should listen to my own sermons a little bit better.
I think we all could.
Yeah.
I know that feeling. I'll go anywhere except somewhere, and then God likes to send you there.
Yes.
So
yes.
That's very good. And you have any remarks? I've asked in general, but I'm thinking specifically for for young people that may be watching, like myself, as being a youth with a mission.
Yes. Well, she often told me, you know, she would have loved to have been born later. And well, I think really to dedicate your life to God, even if there are things that He might ask you that are not easy to do.
Yeah.
And I think she would say she was a very studious person.
Yeah.
She was very musical. In the house, they learned different languages. She had she did some theological study. So I think that would be another thing that I think she would encourage young people to learn as much as you can, both about the Bible as well about life, and to use your talents. Yeah. And I think that would be an important thing. Yeah.
Use your talents. Yes. That's excellent.
Yeah.
And do you have? We're coming up on our time, but do you have any closing remarks or another? We've got time for another story or something that just get us specifically. Something personal or something that.
Yes, there are things that I've learned from her that are very personal.
Yeah.
You know, and But some of the very practical things, like you always knew from Corrie when the time was over. She would say, now before you go home, nobody would have talked about going home yet. She would say, well, let's pray. And I remember when I worked for her that she said, now before you go back to your work, let's pray. And, you know, I didn't feel that the conversation was really quite finished, but you always knew when it was over.
Yes.
And so that is a very personal thing that I've also learned, you know. Don't just continue something because you need to fill the time, but use your time well.
Use your time well.
She was a very hard worker.
That's what I hear.
Very hard worker. She would always be writing notes. She would never go and preach without having prepared for a long time. She would take her notes with her. She wouldn't always use her notes, but she was always very well prepared.
That's really good. I admire that in people.
Yeah,
and admire someone as her who has. Now I can type things up on my computer, but hers probably all handwritten.
Oh yeah, all handwritten, and she had a beautiful handwriting as well.
That is a lost skill these days, I think.
Yes.
Myself included.
Yeah.
So, yes, so that is very good. Thank you, Romkje, for sharing these stories and a little bit about her life and yourself. And to our audience, we'd like to say if you have any questions for Romkje, you can write them in the comments. And we will have a live section of answering these questions, and I certainly look forward, Romkje, to hearing your answers to this and to these questions and hearing more. I'm sure you have many more stories you could tell.
Yes, and I already remember now that there were some other things that I thought I should have mentioned, but that's all right.
Okay, yes, maybe they'll come out in the questions.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I've been looking at some of the comments, and one of the comments I like to mention is from my friend Hedy, whose father we knew very well. He was one of our volunteers in our work, and he actually also hid in the hiding place. So that was really amazing. I think I knew it, but I had forgotten about it. So that was an interesting remark to read.
Excellent. Yes, we'd like to welcome you back. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. We are going to go into a time of questions that I have been given on my phone for Romkje to answer. And the first one we have, Romkje, is from Carl, who asks, as Corrie's secretary, how did you communicate with her and keep up with your responsibilities when she was traveling to the world, back when phones were attached to a wall?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we didn't just communicate a whole lot because I knew what I had to do, and a lot of it was just administrative work, so it wasn't so terribly important that we communicated all the time. And of course we did call at times, and I did write to Corrie when she was not in the country. And sometimes, of course, she was there, and then we could talk together. It was always wonderful when she was there. So, yeah, that's an interesting question, but I do not really remember how we did that.
Well, excellent.
I hope that answers your question, Carl.
Yeah, let us know. We have a question here from Pip, who asks, what happened to the rest of the Ten Boom family, the dad and the aunts, etc.?
Yes, and that is something that I forgot to mention when you asked me before about the family. The aunts all had died before the war. You know, they were elderly, so they died. And then Corrie's sister that was just above her, Nolly and Willem, married. And Corrie and Betsy and father stayed together in the house in Haarlem. And when the family had been taken in by the Germans, her father died after 10 days in the prison in Scheveningen. And I already mentioned that Betsy died in Ravensbrück, and Willem died after the war because he had been getting sick in the concentration camp. And there was a fourth member of the family who also died. His name was Kik. And just recently a book has been written about him called Kik ten Boom, the clockmaker's grandson. And he died probably in Bergen-Belsen. But the amazing thing was that the family didn't hear about that till 7 years after the war. There was so much confusion the first years after the war that you sometimes really didn't know whether people were still alive or not. And so Kik died probably in maybe the last month of the war, and most probably it was in Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp. So that's the question answered about what happened to the rest of her family. And when Corrie started traveling, she had a lot of contact with Nolly, who always prayed for her. And Corrie felt all her life close to Nolly, because Nolly was very similar in age to Corrie. Betsy was much older, and Betsy was also far more dignified than Corrie. Like Betsy didn't like it when Corrie had, for example, the seams out of her dresses, and Corrie didn't mind about that so much. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that Corrie was the very first female watchmaker in the Netherlands. Father ten Boom had I think he sold a church clock, and there was money for Corrie to go to Switzerland and to become licensed watchmaker, and so she became the first female Dutch watchmaker. I always liked that, to hear about that. Apart from all the other things she did, that was really her main occupation before the war.
That's really amazing. I did not know that either.
No, it's it was her father's trade, and of course she learned the trade as well, and then worked with her father in the watch shop behind the workroom behind the shop.
Excellent. We have another question.
Good.
Yannicka asks, Corrie was more well known in the United States and outside the Netherlands than in the Netherlands. Do you know the reason for it?
Well, I think there are some reasons for it, and one of them is that Corrie wasn't the only one in the war who had been hiding Jews. So it wasn't quite as as spectacular, I think, as it was in America. And so I think that's one reason why she was so well known in America. And the other reason was when her film was made in the early 70s, and it was shown many times in all kinds of theaters and churches and schools, she became very well known through that film as well. And people in Holland did know her, and her books are all translated into Dutch as well. I have some of them here, but indeed she was more well known in America as she was in Holland, and she was also very well known in Germany, because most of her books were also translated into German.
Excellent. Thank you for that bit of information. We have a question from Simon, who asks, how do you think Corrie would have reacted to the events of the 2020 through 21 in terms of the impact of the coronavirus?
Well, she would have risen to the occasion, and I think she would have made a lot of films, she would have written books, she would have gone on Zoom, she would have been, going with the time, because that's something I liked about her, she wasn't old-fashioned. in that way, that she used what was there to reach people.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, that's really really cool to hear. We have another question.
Okay.
They keep
I
coming.
like those questions. Yes.
This one is
Yeah.
from Bailey.
Yes.
Bailey asks, "How did you and Corrie meet, and what was your reaction when you found out she wanted you to be her secretary?"
Well, we didn't meet till after I had already started working for her. My reaction when I received that letter that I showed you, I was so honored, but also so very surprised that they would ask me, because I was young, of course, and the confidence that she had in me to even ask me. But her companion Ellen, this is the book that Ellen wrote about her years with Corrie. I think Ellen had really communicated with Corrie that I could do the job, and so that was how I became her secretary.
That's really cool. I think we're waiting.
One more we have time for one more question?
Many more coming.
Or many more coming through, okay.
Yes, we have a viewer that's asking if, did Corrie have resistance being a female and preaching in the churches? And at the time it was not usual to preach as a woman.
Of course she did. Of course she did. But she felt that she had, point one, she had a message to bring. She had experienced something from God helping her in very difficult circumstances, so she felt she could encourage people. And she always said, well, I've heard her say that, I speak for the women, and if the men want to listen in, I'm very happy for them to listen in. But she was not a theologian in that way that she would defend herself, but she just said, if I get a platform, I will speak. And that I've always really liked that, to just do what you can do, and that's what she did.
Excellent. We have another one from Pip again. Asks about how did you start YWAM in the Netherlands? And I should have a note for people. YWAM is Youth with a Mission, is a international missions organization that Romkje founded the Netherlands chapter of it.
Yes, well, I had met Youth with a Mission when I was doing a course in England, and I liked it very much. And those were the days that young people were not really so involved in missions. It was mostly professional people. And so when I had seen and had met these YWAMers in England who actually came to Europe to introduce Youth with a Mission, I thought, oh, this is so wonderful. We should really start this in the Netherlands. And then I started working for Corrie, and it wasn't at all in my mind so much to start Youth with a Mission, but Corrie did encourage it because she liked Youth with a Mission. And then actually in her apartment where she lived at the time, we drew the paper to actually start Youth with a Mission. So that was, she was very much involved with it, and she liked it, and she came and spoke often at our gatherings, both here in Amsterdam, where we had an old ark, an old boat that she would come to, and also later she went to Lausanne and other places where she spoke for Youth with a Mission. So her connection with Youth with a Mission was a very strong one. When we had an event in Munich in 1972, she was one of the speakers there as well, and she loved Youth with a Mission, and she was very happy that we were starting it in the Netherlands. So that is, I can say a lot more about that, her connection with Youth with a Mission, but I was just telling somebody this week, she regretted that she wasn't younger, that she said, I wish I was still a youth with a mission, then I would join the organization. And so that was a very good recommendation for us, because, you know, in those days nobody knew what Youth with a Mission was or what it was all about. But with Corrie's encouragement, I think people got a little bit more confidence that it was okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is, I hope that answers Pippa's question.
I think so. How old were you when you started? I have a question about to further that about along with YWAM. How old were you when you started? And you said it was in 73, 72?
Yeah, 71, 72. I was in my early 20s, 23, 24, 25. So I was really, I wasn't really terribly young, but I was, you know, before I was 25, let's put it like that.
Before you were 25, you started a missions organization that now has...
But honestly, you know, it was just a local one. It was just a Dutch one. And you never know what happens when you start with something. And so it's been really a special, special blessing to me to see that the organization has grown here in the Netherlands, not just in the Netherlands, but worldwide, and that I've seen it grow from just a drawer in Corrie's cupboard where we kept all our letterhead and our envelopes and everything, that she was so much part of the beginning of the organization Youth with a Mission. So when we called this this interview Corrie and I think we should have said Corrie and me, but that's okay.
Really cool.
But the Americans often say that, hey, Corrie and I, or whatever. I thought, well, you know, that was really what so inspired me, because she did things that were... She would go to places that she didn't know where she was going to end up. You know, she had real, she was a real pioneer, and I think it encouraged us to do things that hadn't been done before. So that was Corrie and me. Yeah.
Yes, and did Corrie? I've read in a book, I think it was the one Tramp for the Lord, that Corrie would sometimes pray and feel that she would be led to go to a certain country, and so she would just get on a plane or train and go there, and then say, "Okay, God, why am I here?" How did you think that inspired you, or did in any way, or?
Well, I think what inspired me more was to realize that she would go where she felt she had to go, and as a young girl, I was so surprised about is that she would sleep in a different bed every night. And then I thought, now what do I do as a 17-year-old girl? I sleep in my nice warm bed every night. And I think one of the countries that she went to was Japan, and I think she only had one name. And but then a door opened for her to speak to many people in Japan, and the same happened in America, and the same happened in Argentina. I was just reading that myself again in Tramp for the Lord, that the person who invited her then later wrote her a letter not to come because he couldn't set up meetings for her, but she didn't receive that letter, so she went, and then there was another person who helped her. So very often it was a very insecure thing to go to a country where she really didn't have contacts, particularly in the early years when people didn't know her. Later, of course, they knew her, and the doors opened very wide for her.
Yes. Would you recommend any particular books to read about?
Well, of course, I think The Hiding Place is a classic about her family, and then the book about her father, I think, is a very wonderful book called In My Father's House, because her father had such an enormous impact on her life, and her daily devotionals, I think, are also very good. We have one of them, I don't know whether it's here, and it was given to me because the inside was upside down, and so my children always call that the Chinese book. And so we have we have one book that was a misprint, but we used it a lot because they're short, they're good for children, you know. They don't like long books, and so I've always liked that about Corrie's devotionals, that they're short. Yeah. But there are, I think, even this book about her nephew gives you a different perspective on Corrie's life. And then this is the book about her brother, Willem, who really got her involved in the resistance movement. Oh. So there are all very interesting books.
Yes, that's very nice.
Yeah.
We have another question from Hedy.
Yes.
Or I guess it's her first question. Asks, what can we pray for you, Romkje? Because you have a ministry here.
Yeah. Yes, well, I have two things that I'm really involved with these days, apart from helping with the ministry we do here in Amsterdam called the Schumann Center. I'm very much involved in promoting women in their leadership roles, so that's something I really like to do. And the other thing is to promote Marriage Week, which is focusing 1 week a year on marriage. So yeah, that's good if people can pray for me for health and strength and not becoming, what do you call it, complaining. So I like to stay, I like to stay like Corrie, who was always a lot of fun to be around, and that was, I hope I will be like that as well. Yeah. And one other thing that I think is important to mention about Corrie, you know, she talked a lot about forgiveness and about knowing that you can really trust God. But she said, people worry. And worry, we must not worry, because we will not solve anything, but give your problems over to God. And it sounds easy, I think, but worrying is a deadly thing. So actually my friend Ellen, I showed her your book. Yes. That is what she wrote in the chat. That was an important message that Corrie brought to people as well, not to worry.
That is a very potent message for
today. A very
today.
Potent message for today, because I think a lot of people are afraid, you know, because we live in a very uncertain time with this corona thing, and so it doesn't help us to worry.
No, not at all.
No,
not at all.
No.
I think it's 9 o'clock now, so I think we have time for one or two more, but I've got one here already from Joanna, who asks about Corrie's family role in saving orphans.
Yes. There are two things that I can say about it. Before the war, she and her sister and her father, they raised the children of missionaries as well as orphans. So they lived with the ten Boms, and Betsy made sure that they had something to eat and that they were dressed nicely, and Corrie looked after their school things and their social life. So they had a good way of dealing with these children. But then in the war, there was an orphanage with Jewish children, and Corrie helped to save these orphans. I think there were 100 of them. And the boys, she called them my boys, they took them out, and then the girls distributed these orphans all over the country. So indeed she helped save the orphans. And it's you can read it in her book. I think it's written in, I can't remember in which book it is, probably in The Hiding Place. So she was very much involved in saving people's life and saving kids' lives in the war. And she used her network of the underground workers or the resistance workers for that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you. I believe we have come to the end of our time. It's 9 o'clock. I want to thank you again, Romkje, for lending us your time for this interview. And we want to thank you viewers for joining us tonight. And if you guys like this video, make sure to like it, and again subscribe and ring notifications so that you will catch our upcoming videos we have planned for the rest of the month. And yeah, we thank you, and I hope you guys have a good evening.